Welcome to Dead and Roasted. What can I get you?
I grew up in the forested mountains. Whenever I drive through Oklahoma or parts of Texas where it's flat for tens of miles at a time, it's actually quite unsettling for me. I've driven through places like that during severe thunderstorms too, and it felt like the sky was about to swallow me whole. Maybe deep down there's a reason I fear those vast flat spaces. And today's first story will teach you to fear them as well. Because in the prairies of Iowa, you are never safe. That and more scary work-related stories in today's episode. So clock out, let's grab some coffee. These are tales from the break room. Manhunter of the Prairie. From all of us. I'm from Iowa, born and raised, and my family has been farming in the Midwest for generations. We've got stories going back decades or even centuries. Tales about hard winters and good harvests. The usual struggles of prairie life. But there's one story that's been passed down through my family that still gives me the creeps. But be warned, I'm not entirely sure how much of it is true. This happened to my great-great-grandfather, supposedly, sometime in the 1870s. I heard this story from my grandfather, who heard it from his father, who was one of the boys involved. Every person who's ever told this story in my family has sworn on their life that it's true, exactly as it happened. Though it's not his real name, I'll just call my great-great-grandfather Silas. Silas had a homestead about 40 miles west of what's now Cedar Rapids. This was when Iowa was still pretty wild. Lots of open prairie, scattered farms and the like. You may not see your nearest neighbor for weeks at a time. He had a wife and 4 kids, 2 of which were boys who were old enough to help him farm, maybe 15 and 13, and 2 younger girls. The summer this happened had been going well for them. Good weather and the crops were going strong. Livestock was healthy too, so no problems there. Then sometime in July, they started to find dead animals on their property. These weren't animals that had died naturally or been killed by predators. Someone had been skinning them and leaving the carcasses in the tall grass around their farm. First it was a rabbit, then a couple of prairie dogs, then their neighbor's missing cat. Each time the animal had been carefully skinned, but the meat was left to rot, just the hide taken and the body abandoned. This scared Clara, his wife, and the children pretty bad. The older boys wanted to stand guard with their father's rifle, but Silas told them to keep the family inside whenever they found a fresh kill. He was worried about who might be doing this and why. According to my family's version of events, Silas thought it might be a hostile Indian war party in the area. This was the 1870s. There had been conflicts between settlers and various tribes throughout the region. A lot of white farmers lived in constant fear of attacks, whether those fears were justified or not. The skinned animals felt like a message or a warning to Silas, and he didn't know what it truly meant. This went on for about 3 weeks. They'd wake up and find more skinned animals. Sometimes their own chickens, sometimes wild creatures, always just the hide taken and the meat left to rot in the sun. The smell was getting terrible, and the whole family was on edge. Then one night in early August, around 2 a.m., they were woken up by sounds coming from the barn. Banging, like someone was throwing tools around, and what sounded like shouting or hollering. Not words they could understand, but definitely human voices. Silas grabbed his rifle and a torch and told his family to stay in the house no matter what happened. Clara begged him not to go out there, said they should wait until morning or try to get help from the neighbors. But Silas was worried about their livestock and their winter supplies stored in the barn. He went out to investigate, and he never came back. After about an hour of waiting and hearing no sounds from outside, the 2 older boys decided they had to go check on their father. Clara tried to stop them, but they took the shotgun and another torch and headed for the barn. What they found there is the part of the story that really haunts me, even though I've heard it dozens of times by now. Their father was dead. But it wasn't just that he'd been killed. He'd been scalped, and his scalp was hanging from the peak of the barn roof like some kind of trophy. The boys said there was blood everywhere, but they could not find their father's body anywhere around the barn. But the worst part was what they saw on the barn roof. There was a man sitting up there right next to where their father's scalp was hanging. The boys both swore he was nearly 7 feet tall, taller than their father standing while the man was sitting. He was smiling at them, just sitting there calm as could be, like he was enjoying their horror. The man did not look like a Native American. The older boy, my great-great-uncle Thomas, fired the shotgun at the figure on the roof. He said he was certain it hit him, but the man simply laughed and jumped down from the barn roof. Had to be at least a 20-foot drop, and landed on his feet without any trouble at all. Then he ran off into the darkness faster than a person should have been able to move. The boys grabbed their father's scalp from the barn roof and ran back to the house. They told Clara what they'd seen, showing her what they'd brought back. She immediately began to pack their essentials. She said that they were leaving that night, right then, never coming back. They hitched up their wagon in the dark and left everything they couldn't carry. The whole family, Clara, the 4 kids, what few possessions they could load, rode toward the nearest town on a wagon along with their only horse, which was about 15 miles away. But they weren't alone on that trip. For the first few miles, they could hear something out there following them. Not just footsteps, but something big moving through the tall grass alongside the trail. Sometimes they'd catch glimpses of a figure in the moonlight, always keeping pace with their wagon but staying just out of clear sight. Clara kept the horse moving as fast as she dared in the dark. The children huddled together in the back of the wagon, too scared to look behind them. This went on for what felt like hours. The thing followed them, only stopped when they reached the tree line, about 8 miles from their farm. Once they got into the wooded area, the sounds stopped, and they didn't see the figure anymore. But none of them felt safe until they reached the town just before dawn. They stayed with the pastor's family for a few days, trying to figure out what to do. Clara wondering if her husband was alive or actually dead. People don't always die when they're scalped. They're not always dead when the scalping starts. Clara wanted to report what happened to the local sheriff, but she was afraid no one would believe the part about the 7-foot man or how far he'd jumped from the barn roof. A few days later, several men from the town, including the sheriff, went back to the farm to retrieve Silas's body and see what had happened to their property. They found the farm had been completely ransacked. The house was torn apart and the furniture smashed. Their remaining livestock had been killed and skinned. But they never did find Silas's body. The only trace ever left of him was his scalp, which the boys had already taken from the barn roof. The men searched the area for days, but found no sign of whoever had done this. None of the tracks made sense. No evidence of where an attacker had come from or gone. It was like he had vanished from the prairie. Clara took the children and moved east, back toward more settled areas near the Mississippi River. She never remarried, and according to family stories, she never got over what happened to Silas. The children grew up and had families of their own, but they tried not to talk much about their time on the Prairie homestead from then on. My great-great-uncle Thomas, the boy who shot at that figure on the barn, lived to be over 90, and right up until the day he died, he insisted that what they'd seen was no man. He said that no man could have jumped down from that barn roof and landed running. No man would have pursued them for 8 miles when they rode that wagon. The family never did go back to that land. As far as I know, it stayed abandoned for years before someone else eventually homesteaded it. I've tried to find records of what happened to the property, but land records from that time period are spotty, and I've never been able to confirm exactly where the farm was located. What bothers me most about this story is how consistent the details have been every time I've ever heard it. Usually when stories get passed down through families, they change over time. Some details get added or forgotten. The story gets more dramatic, more simplified. But this one has stayed exactly the same. The skinned animals, 7-foot figure, the impossible jump from the barn roof, the thing following their wagon. Every family member who's told this story has included the exact same details. It comes off not as a campfire story, but as a traumatic event, something they only started to tell years and years later when they finally wanted to get it off their chests. I've looked into the history of that area. There were certainly conflicts between settlers and Native American tribes, and there are documented cases of raids and killings. But I've never found anything that matches the specific details of what happened to my great-great-grandfather. The part about the skinned animals is particularly strange to me. That doesn't really match the patterns of any documented raids or conflicts I've read about. Seems more like psychological warfare, like someone was deliberately trying to terrorize the family before attacking. Sometimes I've wondered if this story got mixed up with local legends or folklore over the years. Maybe something did happen to Silas, but maybe the details got combined with other stories or local myths about the supernatural. When I think like that, I then think back to my great-great-uncle Thomas, who lived his whole life swearing what he saw was exactly the truth. You want to know something gross? He even had that scalp. Well, he had a scalp he claimed was my great-great-grandfather's. Pretty gnarly, huh? My grandpa said he saw it once when he was a kid, stored in a wooden box in his grandmother Clara's attic. But it was eventually buried with Clara when she died. So I guess at the end of the day, there's really no physical evidence left of what happened that night. I live in Iowa now, about 2 hours from where I think that homestead might have been. Let me ask you, do you think I should try to find the exact location? Go looking? Try to find out if the story is true? Or leave it alone before the Manhunter on the Prairie finds me? Movie Town Psycho Guy made life a living heck for me. From PaperNut. The first time it happened, I thought someone was playing a prank. It was April 2005, about 20 minutes before we closed at 10 p.m. I was working the evening shift alone at Movie Town, which was pretty normal for a Tuesday night. Movie Town was this regional movie and video game rental store way back, but I don't think it exists anymore now, though. Business had been slow all day, maybe 12 customers total, mostly people returning their movies they'd rented over the weekend. I was in the back office doing the nightly count when I heard something hit the drop box outside. We had this drive-through set up, left over from when the building used to be a Dairy Queen. Customers could return movies without getting out of their car, which was convenient for them and us. The drop box was just a metal chute that led into a bin inside the store. When I walked over to collect whatever had been returned, I instead found a copperhead snake coiled up in the bottom of the bin, very much alive, very unhappy about its situation. Instinctively, I jumped back, and when I did, I knocked over a display of candy bars in the process. The snake was a few feet long, thick around as a garden hose, with that distinctive hourglass pattern that makes copperheads easy to identify if you know what to look for. And I did know what to look for. I'd grown up in a rural area, where running into venomous snakes was not too unusual. What was unusual was finding one in a video store drop box in the middle of suburbia. I grabbed the longest thing I could find. That ended up being a metal poster tube, which was used for advertising displays. I managed to pin the snake down long enough to get it into an empty bin. The whole time, my hands were shaking. Copperheads are not the most aggressive snakes, but they'll bite you if they feel cornered, and their venom can definitely kill you if you don't get treatment. I called my manager then. The guy lived about 15 minutes away. He came in and took a look, and immediately called animal control. While we waited for them to arrive, we checked the security camera that covered the drive-thru area. but the angle wasn't good. We could see cars pulling up to the window, but not what they were doing at the drop box. The animal control officer who showed up was this older guy who had been dealing with wildlife calls for 20 years. He took one look at the snake, saying it definitely didn't wander in on its own. He asked if we'd had any trouble with customers lately, any disputes or angry customers. I couldn't think of anyone specific. We got the occasional person upset about late fees, of course, but nothing that seemed like it would escalate to snake throwing. The animal control guy removed the snake and suggested we file a police report instead, which my manager did the next day. The cop who took the report said it was probably just kids messing around, though he admitted it was a pretty extreme prank. He asked us to call if anything else happened. 3 weeks later, something did. Same situation. Tuesday night, about 20 minutes before closing, working alone. This time I heard the distinctive sound of a car pulling into the drive-thru, engine idling for maybe 30 seconds, then driving off real quick. When I went to check the drop box, I found another copperhead. This one was bigger, more aggressive than the first, too. It struck at the metal walls of the bin twice while I was trying to figure out how to get it out safely. This time I didn't hesitate. I called 911 immediately, then called my manager. The responding officer was different from the one we'd had before, but he'd been briefed about the situation. He helped us contain the snake until animal control arrived. Animal control sent the same guy. He seemed genuinely puzzled by the whole thing. "Copperheads just don't show up in pairs like that," he said, loading the snake into a secure container. It wasn't really a pair since it was weeks apart, but okay. "Someone's got to be catching these and bringing them here on purpose. That's not easy to do. These aren't garter snakes. You can't just pick them up with a stick. I mean, you can, but it's pretty risky." This time, both the police and my manager took it more seriously. We installed a temporary camera specifically aimed at the drop box, though it was just a basic setup that recorded 2 VHS tapes. Dennis also started to require someone to stay late with me on the nights I closed alone, at least until we figured out what was going on. For the next month, nothing happened. I started to think maybe whoever was doing this had gotten bored at last, or maybe they got scared off, what with the police being involved. The temporary camera didn't capture anything unusual, just normal customers returning movies, the occasional raccoon poking around the dumpster, my manager's car when he'd stop by to check in on things. But then came the skunk. June 15th, a Thursday this time. I was working with my coworker. I'll just call her Sarah for the sake of anonymity. Sarah was a college student who had been at the store for about 6 months. We were both behind the counter when we heard the familiar sound of a car at the drive-thru. 30 seconds later, we heard something heavy hit the drop box with a loud thud. Sarah went to check it, and I heard her gag before she even got to the bin. The smell hit us both at the same time. An overwhelming burning stench that skunks produce when they're threatened, or in this case, dead. The smell was so strong it made my eyes water instantly. Yep, inside the drop box was a dead skunk, clearly roadkill from the smell and condition. But someone had gone through the effort of picking it up and throwing it into our store. Couldn't imagine how bad their car smelled. That scent permeated everything. We had to evacuate the building immediately and call my manager to help us deal with it. It took 3 days of professional cleaning, ozone treatments, and every deodorizing product known to man before we could reopen. The smell still lingered a bit for another week after that. Customers would walk in, make a face. Sometimes they would leave without renting anything. We lost a lot of business that week, which was especially painful as the store was already struggling financially. My manager was furious. He filed another police report, demanding they do more to catch whoever was doing this. A detective was assigned to the case. He said that they'd increased patrols in the area, but without a clear description of our perpetrator or their vehicle, there wasn't much they could do besides respond when incidents occurred. I thought with our new temporary camera we'd have something on VHS, but my manager had stopped loading new VHSs to the camera for the last few days. He had assumed our assailant would not come back by then. He was wrong, and now he paid for it. I guess we all paid for it. Now, the only consistent detail we had was the timing. All 3 incidents had happened on weeknight evenings, always within about half an hour of closing time, always when there were minimal customers around. It suggested someone who either knew our schedule or had been watching the store to learn our patterns. Detective Martinez interviewed both Sarah and I about any customers who might have seemed suspicious or upset. We went through our mental catalog of regular customers, but we couldn't identify anyone who seemed capable of this level of harassment. Most of our regulars were families, older people who rented classic movies, and college students looking for cheap entertainment. The detective also asked about the drive-through camera footage, but I gave him the unfortunate news about the VHS tapes not being placed in it for a while. After the skunk incident, my manager invested in a better security camera system, though it took several weeks to get installed due to the cost and due to the company's availability. July and August passed without incident. We were hoping the person responsible had moved on. Maybe they got scared off with the increased security measures. The new cameras had eventually gotten installed. They were great, providing clear views of both the drive-through area and the parking lot, with night vision capability and digital recording. Sarah quit at the end of August to focus on her studies, so my manager hired a new part-timer named Harley. I trained Harley on all the closing procedures, including what had to be done if anything unusual showed up in the drop box. It felt ridiculous explaining what he needed to check for, snakes and dead animals, but I wanted him to be prepared. September and October were quiet. The new normal felt sustainable. 2 people closing each night, good camera coverage, police aware of the situation. I was starting to relax a bit, thinking maybe the whole thing was over. I was wrong. On a Tuesday, Harley had called in sick, so I had to close with my manager himself. We'd just finished the nightly procedures and were heading out to our cars when I heard an engine roar to life in the parking lot. Car headlights suddenly blazed on, and they were pointing directly at us. The vehicle, a black SUV, accelerated straight towards us, not towards the exit, towards us specifically. Dennis grabbed my arm and yanked me backward against the building as the SUV flew past, missing us by maybe 3 feet. The side mirror actually scraped against the brick wall where we'd been standing. The whole thing happened in seconds. The SUV tore out of the parking lot, tires squealing, and disappeared down the main road before either of us could react. We were both shaking, pressed against the wall trying to process what just happened. "He tried to run us over," Dennis said. He sounded shocked. "That son of a gun actually tried to kill us." We called 911. 2 patrol cars arrived within 5 minutes, followed by our detective. The new camera system had captured everything, though the SUV's license plate was not terribly visible due to the angle and the bright headlights. What the cameras did show clearly was the deliberate nature of the attack. The vehicle had been parked in a corner of the lot, engine off, waiting for us to come outside. Our detective took our statements and assured us they'd analyze the footage to see if they could enhance any details about the vehicle or driver. He also recommended we consider hiring private security, at least temporarily, though my manager said the store could not afford it. I told my manager I was done with this. I'd been nervous about the snakes and annoyed by the skunk, but this was attempted murder. I was not coming back to work until this person was caught, and maybe not even then. My manager understood completely and said he couldn't blame me. My last day at Movietown was November, that same day. 2 weeks later, my manager called me with an update. One of the other part-time employees who'd started working more hours after I left had been closing with him on a Friday night when the same black SUV pulled up to the drive-thru. Instead of throwing something into the drop box, the driver had thrown a cup of liquid at her through the window. It was acid. Not enough to cause permanent damage, thank God, but it burned her shoulder and arm badly enough to require hospital treatment. She had been wearing a thick sweater that absorbed most of the liquid, probably saving her from much worse injuries. This time, the security cameras caught a partial license plate number, and within 48 hours, police had identified and arrested the perpetrator. It was a 23-year-old man who lived about 10 miles from the store in a run-down apartment complex. My manager even told me the juicy tidbits of his arrest. This guy was unemployed, lived alone, and had no apparent connection to Movietown or any of its employees. According to his confession, he had chosen our store randomly because the drive-thru setup made it easy to dump things and drive away quickly. He said he'd been bored, thought it was funny to mess with us. The snakes had been captured from a wooded area near his apartment building, using homemade traps. The skunk had been roadkill he'd collected during one of his late-night drives. The acid attack was escalation. He'd gotten frustrated that his previous harassment hadn't shut down the store permanently. When police searched his apartment, they found evidence of other things he'd been up to. Similar harassment at a gas station and a fast food restaurant in neighboring towns. They found something that still gives me nightmares. In his apartment were cages. Cages containing the remains of several cats and dogs that showed signs of deliberate torture and abuse. The man was charged with multiple felonies, including assault with a deadly weapon, animal cruelty, and attempted vehicular homicide. He eventually pled guilty to avoid trial and was sentenced to 8 years. The detective said the evidence of animal torture probably added years to his sentence, since judges tend to take that seriously as an indicator of future violent behavior. That Movietown closed permanently a few months later. My manager said the incidents had scared away too many customers, and the insurance costs after that girl's attack made the business unsustainable. The building sat empty for years before being demolished, making room for a chain pharmacy. That whole experience left me with a lasting paranoia about working in retail, especially in isolated locations during late hours. Even now, basically 20 years later, I get nervous when I'm leaving work after dark, when I hear a car engine start up in the parking lot. What really bothers me is how random all this was. This wasn't a customer who had a grudge against us for something we might have done to anger them. We were just random targets for someone who found it entertaining to torment other people. I used to be a moderator. From Anonymous. I've got to keep everything here completely anonymous for obvious reasons, but I wanted to share what happened to me a few years ago, because I think other people in similar positions should know how dangerous it can be. I moderated a large subreddit. Can't say which one. It's got a lot of subscribers and stays active around the clock, though. I'd been doing it for about 4 years, mostly as a volunteer thing. For my actual job, I worked from home in web development. I was able to keep an eye on the forum throughout the day. Most of the work is routine, removing spam and handling rule violations. Living alone in a quiet suburban neighborhood, I thought the worst thing I'd have to worry about was maybe some angry DMs, or someone creating alt accounts to get around bans. My golden retriever, Bailey, and I had a pretty peaceful routine. I'd work from my home office during the day. She'd spend time in the fenced backyard, and evenings we'd walk around the neighborhood. In March, I banned a user for repeatedly violating our community rules. Standard stuff, a permanent ban with a brief explanation about the violation. That's when everything started to go wrong. The messages started innocent enough. Standard ban appeal. I didn't break any rules, and this is censorship, and you're power tripping. I get maybe a dozen of those every week. Most people accept the ban and move on. Some create alt accounts and try again. This guy chose option 3. Within 6 hours of the ban, he'd found my other Reddit accounts. Don't ask me how, I thought I'd been careful keeping them separate. They all had different usernames and different email addresses, different posting habits. But somehow he connected all of them. Screenshots of my comments from other subreddits started to show up in his ban appeal messages. I know you post about your golden retriever on r/dogs, one message said. Bailey, right? Cute dog. That's when I knew this wasn't just some angry user blowing off steam. I had never mentioned my dog's name in any discussion on the subreddit I moderate. He'd gone through months of my post history across multiple accounts, building a personal profile of me. Things escalated quickly. He soon found my Facebook, started to comment on photos from years ago, like my high school graduation picture, and a vacation post from 2019. Always the same tone, not directly threatening, but letting me know he could reach me anywhere. Nice beach house, he said, on a photo where I'd been careful not to tag the location. Except he knew my real name now, too. I reported everything to Reddit admins, even decided to report it to the police. An officer assigned to my case took it seriously once she saw the volume. Over 200 messages across different platforms in the first week alone. But the guy was using VPNs, creating new accounts faster than he could be banned, always staying just barely on the legal side of harassment. The phone calls started in week 3. My number isn't public anywhere, but somehow he had gotten it. Always from different numbers, always the same voice. Calm and reasonable, like he just wanted to have a conversation. We need to talk about the ban. I think there's been a misunderstanding. The first few times I hung up immediately. Then he started to leave voicemails. I drive past your house every day now. Bailey's looking healthy. She trusts people a lot, doesn't she? Comes right up to the fence when strangers walk by. That message made my hands shake. Bailey spent hours in the fenced-in backyard while I was on video calls. The idea of this stranger walking by, watching her, studying our routine, it turned my stomach. The officer arranged increased patrols, but patrol cars can't be everywhere all the time. I started to work from my brother's house, only going home to check on things and walk Bailey. Even then, I felt like I was being watched. Cars that seemed to slow down when they passed. Footprints in my flower bed under my living room window. On April 15th, my neighbor called me at my brother's place. Something's wrong with Bailey. She's in your backyard, but she's not moving. I'd kept my place locked down to ensure Bailey was safe, so someone had broken in. I drove home faster than I should have, and I ran straight to the backyard gate, where Bailey should not have been. But there she was, lying on her side near the water bowl, breathing but unconscious. Her tongue was hanging out, and there was vomit in the grass nearby. I scooped her up and drove straight to the emergency vet. The vet found antifreeze in her blood. Someone had thrown meat laced with ethylene glycol over my fence. The cops found the remaining poisoned meat scattered around the yard. Hamburger chunks with a sweet smell, obviously prepared ahead of time. I didn't find evidence of someone knocking anything down or breaking glass, but I know I had locked her inside the house, so this guy found a way, somehow, to let her out, leaving some poisoned meat in the backyard, and just left, knowing she'd eat it. Bailey survived, but barely. 3 days in the animal hospital, IV fluids, activated charcoal, medication to protect her kidneys. Someone had tried to murder my dog to send me a message. Someone that knew how to get in my house, a way that I didn't know. But luckily, 2 days after I came home with Bailey, this man was arrested. A 34-year-old unemployed man living 15 miles away. When they searched his place, they found printed copies of every social media post I'd made in 6 months, maps of my neighborhood with my house circled in red ink, photos of Bailey taken through my fence with a telephoto lens, and a detailed plan for breaking into my house. Apparently, a latch on my back window didn't work and never properly sealed. According to the officer, I wasn't supposed to be the final target either. The guy had written out a whole scenario. He was just a psycho. The guy is in jail now, and Bailey's doing fine. But I don't leave her alone in the backyard ever anymore. And my days of moderation are over. My tenant never left. From RG. People don't like landlords. Believe me, I get it. I was a renter once too. Everyone starts somewhere, and it's not always the best conditions or the best price. And that's why now, having a few properties to myself, I feel like I'm in a lucky position, and I don't price my stuff too high. 12 years since I first bought my first rental property, I now own 6 houses in different parts of the city. This started as an investment when real estate was cheap, but it turned into my full-time job when the rental market took off. Most of my tenants are great people. They pay their rent and take care of the place, and they call when something breaks, and I'm happy to come fix it, or have someone who can come by. You get the occasional problem tenant, but nothing I couldn't handle with proper documentation and legal procedures. Well, let's talk about a guy I'll refer to as Derek Vance. He seemed normal enough when he applied for a duplex I had. Single guy, early 30s, said he worked in tech. His credit check came back clean. References from previous landlords checked out. I approved his application and handed over the keys, expecting a routine rental experience. The duplex is in an older neighborhood, built in the 1940s, but I had renovated it completely before putting it on the market. 2 bedrooms, 1 bath, a small yard, garage converted into storage space. Not fancy, but definitely clean and functional. Monthly rent was $1,000. A couple $100 underpriced for that area, actually. Probably why I got so many applications for the place. Problems started in month 2. Rent was 3 days late. Then, a week late. Then 2 weeks. When I called about it, Derek always had an excuse. Payroll issues, banking error, family emergency. He'd eventually pay, usually after I'd threaten eviction. But it became a pattern. By month 4, he was consistently 2 weeks behind. Neighbors started complaining around the same time. Strange smells coming from the duplex. Loud noises at all hours. People coming and going at odd times. When I drove by to check on the property, I could see trash piled up in the yard. Windows were covered with blankets or cardboard. The place looked more like a drug house. I started the eviction process in June after he missed the entire month's payment. The legal process takes time in our state. Notice to quit, waiting period, court filing, scheduled hearing. Whole thing dragged out for months. During those final months, the complaints from neighbors got worse. The duplex was destroying the property values for the whole block. Derek finally moved out the day before the sheriff's department was scheduled to physically remove him. I expected the damage. That's normal when you have to evict someone. But what I found inside was beyond anything I'd seen in 12 years of rental properties. Every room had holes punched in the walls. Kitchen cabinets had been ripped off their hinges. Bathroom tiles were smashed with what looked like a sledgehammer. The carpet was stained with various substances I did not want to identify. The basement had been converted into some kind of drug lab. Burn marks in the concrete, chemical stains, makeshift ventilation had destroyed the HVAC system. The restoration company quoted $25,000 just to make the place habitable again, and that didn't include the HVAC, which would likely be another $25,000. Insurance would not cover the drug-related damage either. I spent the next 2 months gutting the house down to the studs, trying to salvage what I could find. By November, the place was completely empty. No furniture, no fixtures, just bare walls and subfloor. I was there every day supervising contractors. I had to deal with city inspectors who wanted to make sure we removed all the contaminated materials property. The house was completely empty and sounds carried. A month after that, I had stayed late to measure for new kitchen cabinets. The electrician left around 5, and I was alone in the house with my tape measurer and a clipboard. I began to hear footsteps upstairs. Slow footsteps across the master bedroom floor, like someone trying to be quiet, though they were still wearing shoes. They walked from the window side of the room toward the hallway. Right away I called out, thinking maybe one of the contractors had left someone behind to finish up the work. No response. The footsteps stopped. I climbed the stairs to check. Every room was empty, just like I'd left them that morning. But there was a smell, that same chemical odor from when Derek had lived there, mixed with something else that smelled bad. In the master bedroom, I noticed something that hadn't been there before. A section of new drywall along the back wall, different from the restoration work. We'd stripped everything down to the studs. There shouldn't have been any drywall there. I cut into it with my utility knife. Behind the drywall was a space about 4 feet wide and 6 feet tall. Inside were blankets, empty food containers, a gallon jug that reeked of urine. Someone had been living in the walls. I backed up toward the stairs and called 911. While waiting for the police, I suddenly heard running footsteps overhead, then the sound of something heavy hitting the floor. By the time cops arrived, the house was quiet. They searched every room but found nothing. I decided to install some motion sensors and cameras throughout the house. For a week, nothing happened. But then, an alarm went off while I was there with the flooring contractor. We were in the basement at the time, discussing subflooring when the motion detector started to beep upstairs. I told the contractor to stay put, and I went up to investigate. The alarm was coming from the master bedroom. I should have waited for police. Instead, I grabbed a piece of rebar from the construction debris, and I went to check. Derek Vance was standing in the middle of the room, wearing the same filthy clothes from 3 months ago. He looked like he had lost 40 pounds, and his face was covered in sores. His eyes completely dilated. He was on something. A whole lot of something.
"This is my house," he said. "You can't make me leave."
I told him he needed to get out, that I was calling the police. He stared at me for a few seconds with those huge black pupils. But then, he lunged forward with a kitchen knife in his hand. I tried to dodge sideways, but he was faster than someone in his condition should have been. I underestimated him. The knife caught me just below the ribs. Not too deep, but deep enough to hurt like heck. I swung the rebar and caught him in the shoulder. He screamed and dropped the knife, then pushed past me and ran down the stairs, half tumbling. By the time I made it to the front door, he was gone. My contractor found me sitting on the porch steps, holding a towel against my ribs, on the phone with 911. I got 12 stitches and a tetanus shot. I was blessed because the knife had missed everything important, but the wound took weeks to heal properly. Police searched the neighborhood, but never found Vance. I put the house up for auction that next month and sold it for half of what it was worth. The new owner is fixing it up as a flip. I didn't tell him about Vance or the hidden space or the attack. Not my problem anymore. Lake Guntersville Monster, from Tommy B. This happened about 8 months ago. I've been fishing bass tournaments professionally for 15 years, making some decent money at it throughout Alabama and Tennessee. Not enough to get rich, but enough to cover expenses and help put some food on the table for my family, though fishing does put food on the table anyway. But I digress. My wife thinks I should retire from tournament fishing and stick to guide trips on our local lakes, but the competition is what makes me keep going. I'm a competitive guy. Love to match my skills against other anglers, trying to find fish when everyone else is struggling. Not the same thrill that regular fishing can provide. Lake Guntersville in Alabama has always been one of my favorite tournament venues. Consistent bass population with good structure. It's got plenty of deep water and shallow flats to work, depending on conditions. I've placed in the money there 6 times in the past decade, including a second-place finish in 2019 that paid for my daughter's first year of college. This particular tournament was supposed to be routine. It was a 3-day event with about 60 boats registered. The winner would take home $15,000 plus sponsorship bonuses. I had finished 7th after day 1 with about 18 pounds. A good position to make a move on day 2. Day 2 started different than I'd planned. Instead of heading back to the grass beds where I'd caught fish the day before, I decided to try some deeper structure on the south end of the lake. Sometimes taking a risk pays off in tournament fishing, especially when you need to make up ground on the leaders. But by 10 a.m. I hadn't had a single bite, working my usual rotation of lures. Spinner baits, crankbaits, soft plastic. Nothing was working. My fish finder showed plenty of bait fish in the area, but no bass. The water looked good, but the fish weren't cooperating. Around 11:30, I was about 2 miles from the nearest boat, working a submerged creek channel in 25 feet of water. And that's when my depth finder started showing something big moving along the bottom. It happens sometimes after heavy rains, though we hadn't had much rain lately. I kept fishing, but kept one eye on the depth finder to see which direction the object was moving. But then, the water under my boat turned dark. Not muddy or cloudy, but dark, like something big was blocking the sunlight from penetrating. The shadow was bigger than my boat, maybe twice as long. I could see the edges of it extending beyond my hull on both sides. I cut the trolling motor and grabbed my spotlight, even though it was broad daylight. The water was usually clear enough to see 10 or 15 feet down, but all I could see was darkness. It was like looking into a deep cave. Something surfaced about 20 feet off my starboard side. I thought it was a log or a piece of debris. Just a dark, flat surface breaking the water slightly. It was maybe 3 feet across, but logs don't have eyes. Its eye was the size of a dinner plate, pale yellow with a vertical pupil like a snake. It looked right at me for maybe 5 seconds, just watching. Then the head started to rise out of the water a bit more. It was shaped like a turtle's head, but massive, probably 6 feet from the tip of the snout to where it disappeared back into the water. Dark brown, almost black, with a rough, pebbly texture. As more of it emerged, I could see what looked like a beak. Sharp looking, too. I've been fishing these waters for over a decade. I know what lives in Lake Guntersville, or I thought I did. Should have been just bass and catfish and gar and the occasional snapping turtle. I've never seen anything remotely like this. The head turned slightly, studying my boat from different angles. The eye tracked my movement as I reached for my phone to take a picture. I fumbled with the camera app. My hands were shaking. But by the time I got the camera steady, all that was left were ripples. The head was gone. The water immediately began to churn a bit. Not violently, but a steady, powerful current that rocked my boat from side to side. Whatever it was swimming away fast. The dark shadow under my boat moved toward deeper water, and I could feel the displacement as it passed. My depth finder showed the massive return signal moving away, heading toward the main channel of the Tennessee River. The rest of the tournament was a disaster. I couldn't concentrate on my fishing. Every time my lure hit the water, I was watching for movement beneath the surface. I ended up catching only 2 small bass the rest of the day, dropped to 32nd place overall. A few weeks later, I was talking to another tournament angler who'd fished Guntersville for longer than I had. Without going into details, I asked if he'd ever seen anything weird in the lake, anything that didn't quite belong there. He got quiet for a minute, then asked if I'd been fishing the deep water on the south end. When I said yes, he nodded and said he'd had a strange encounter there a few years back, something he had never reported because he didn't think anyone would believe him. I pressed him for details, but he wouldn't elaborate. Just said that some parts of the lake were different, that experienced anglers knew to avoid certain areas during certain times of the year. A few beers later, he finally opened up. Said it happened during a tournament about 3 years back, early morning before the other boats spread out. He was working the same general area I'd been fishing, following a creek channel in deep water. His trolling motor quit on him, just died out completely, brand new motor too, that had been running fine all week. While he was checking the connections, something bumped his boat from underneath. Not like hitting a submerged log or rock. A big bump that lifted his boat slightly and rocked it side to side. He started thinking maybe it was a big catfish or a gar, so he got his trolling motor working and moved to shallower water. But whatever it was followed him. Every few minutes, another bump from below. Then his fish finder started going crazy, showing him something massive pacing around his boat a couple dozen feet down. He said the return signal was solid, like scanning a submarine. When he'd speed up, it would speed up. When he'd stop, it would stop. The thing that really spooked him was when he tried to leave the area entirely. He gunned his outboard motor and headed for the main lake, but something grabbed his boat from underneath and held it in place for maybe 10 seconds. The motor was running full throttle, prop churning water, but his boat wasn't moving forward at all. Then whatever had hold of him let go, and he shot forward so fast he nearly lost his balance. Said he never saw it surface, never got a clear look at what it was, but he's fished those waters for 20 years and knows the difference between hitting debris and something alive deciding to mess with your boat. You ever been to Lake Guntersville? What's the craziest thing you've seen there? Not Alone, from 1992 Skynet. I work as an astronomer at a facility that I can't name for professional reasons. It's located in a remote area of the Southwest, where light pollution is minimal and atmospheric conditions are ideal for observation. I've been there for 6 years now, mostly doing deep space imaging and data analysis for various university partnerships. The facility operates around the clock, with different teams handling day and night observations. I usually work the evening shift, arriving around 4 p.m. and leaving sometime between midnight and 2 a.m., depending on what we're tracking. It's a small facility, maybe 8 people total on any given shift, spread across 3 buildings connected by covered walkways. The location is deliberately isolated. We're about 40 miles from the nearest town, connected by a 2-lane highway that cuts through desert and low hills. No other buildings visible in any direction, no cell phone coverage. Just us and the equipment under some of the darkest skies in North America. I've always been a skeptical person, trained to observe and document phenomena objectively. After so long studying astronomy, you're able to distinguish between natural events and equipment malfunctions, between atmospheric effects and actual anomalies. When you spend your career looking at the sky professionally, you develop pretty reliable instincts about what belongs up there and what doesn't. This first incident happened one morning around 1:30 a.m. I was walking from the main observatory building to the parking area after a long night calibrating our new imaging array. Clear night, no moon. I was about 50 yards from my car when I noticed something blocking stars in my peripheral vision. I looked up and saw a massive triangular craft hovering directly over the main building, completely silent, maybe 200 feet across, with a row of steady white lights outlining each edge. Not blinking navigation lights like aircraft use, just constant illumination that seemed to come from the craft itself rather than external fixtures. The thing was perfectly motionless. It hung there like it was suspended from invisible cables, maybe 300 feet above the building. I stood watching it for maybe 30 seconds, trying to process it. Then it moved. It wasn't gradual. It had no visible acceleration when it moved. One moment it was stationary above the building. The next moment it was about a quarter mile to the east. Instantaneous relocation, like someone had edited a video and cut out the frames between positions. Then it happened again. Instant movement to a position south of the facility. Same distance, same impossible relocation. For years I've studied orbital mechanics and atmospheric physics. Nothing moves like that. Aircraft accelerate and decelerate according to physical laws. Satellites follow predictable trajectories. This thing ignored every principle of motion I understand. After the second movement, all the lights along the craft's edges flashed simultaneously. Not like a strobe, just a single bright pulse that lit up the entire area for maybe half a second. Then the lights went out completely, and the craft was gone, just instantly gone. I went back inside and checked our external monitoring equipment, but we don't have those types of cameras pointed skyward, and our radio equipment had not detected anything unusual. The second major sighting happened 3 weeks later, while I was driving home around midnight. I was 10 miles from the facility when I noticed lights in my rearview mirror. I was surprised to see the same triangular pattern and steady white illumination. The craft was about a quarter mile behind me, just following my car, or at least it seemed like that. I tried speeding up, but it kept coming. I slowed down, and it seemed to slow down too. About 5 minutes of this, I began to feel lightheaded and nauseous. Reminded me of the start of altitude sickness, but for seemingly no reason. My hands were quivering on the steering wheel. I pulled over on the shoulder and sat with the engine running, trying to steady my breathing. When I looked in the mirror again, the lights were gone. The craft had continued on without me. Since then, over the past year, I've seen it maybe 12 times. The same shape of craft and the same lights, so I know it's the same thing. But these sightings are always brief, often just glimpses. I've yet to see it as closely again compared to the first 2 times, but I'm fine with that. I love my job and don't want to be scared away from it. But I do find the sightings fascinating. I wonder if it's a government test project of some sort. Otherwise, I'm at a loss for words. You ever heard of prairie madness or prairie fever? It's a psychological condition said to be caused by extreme isolation combined with monotonous landscape of prairie life. Causes severe depression, anxiety, agoraphobia, and even hallucinations and delusions. Makes you wonder, what really happened in that first story? If it's real, maybe prairie madness is simply a warning sign. Your brain telling you to leave as soon as possible. Good night. Thanks for tuning in to another episode of Tales from the Break Room. I've been your host, Darkness Prevails. For more scary work-related stories, please follow Tales from the Break Room on Spotify and Apple Podcasts or your favorite podcast app, and leave us a review. You can send us your scary work stories at eeriecast.com/submit. And if you're dying for more scary stories, consider pre-ordering my new upcoming book, a beautiful hardcover collection of campfire stories called, appropriately, Creepy Campfire Stories. You can get it on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, or go to creepycampfirestories.com or find it on your favorite bookstore website. Comes out July 8th. I think you'll like it. And thank you for your support. Until next time, everyone, it's time for me to clock out, because when I'm not working at the coffee shop, I'm working as a dad. And that means I haven't slept in years. See you soon.